So first I'll introduce myself. My name is milie Monnet. I am Anishinaabe from my mother. She comes from a community called Kiriganzibi, about 3.5 hours from here. And my father is French, from France, so I'm also half French. So Teresa invited me to speak briefly about this festival that I created 2 years ago called Indigenous Contemporary Scene. So we have actually an upcoming edition coming like starting next week. And then I started that 2 years ago, and it was co-presented with UFDEA Festival. So it's really a manifestation of live arts made by Indigenous creators. And so it's music, theater, performances, installation, and dance. But 1 year on two, what I'm doing, because for me, what's really important is to also create spaces for critical reflections between Indigenous creators. So 1 year on two, it will be like a festival format, and then the other year it will be like more that a space for the critical reflection. So this year I'm partnering up with Festival Transamérique, FTA, to present the Indigenous Creators Exchange. So I've invited another curator, she's Anishinaabe from Ontario, to pair up with me to design this exchange. And we invited 5 Indigenous creators from Quebec and 5 from Ontario. So to really, because there is a big gap in our community between Francophone Indigenous and Anglophone Indigenous. So one of the mission that I have, or the vision, is really how to bridge that, because like for example, like sometimes I work as a simultaneous translator, and within my nation, half of the communities are Anglophone and half are Francophone, and it's not everybody that speaks Anishinaabe-Moan. So to be able to meet and take decisions, political decisions, we need translators. This is the result of dual colonization, I guess. So this year, yes, so I will be presenting this exchange, and every year I like to work with a theme. So this year, the theme that I've chosen is representation and self-representation. So for us to really think about that, what it means for us to have our work being visible in Quebec on mainstream stages, for example, but also what is to question also, because usually the representations of Indigenous people are often seen through a prism, of all the colonial discourses. So yes. So what I'll do is I'll show you a little video of last year's performance festival. So last year, because I had funding from the 375th anniversary of the creation of Montreal, so I decided to articulate all my programming around the theme of reconciliation, but from our perspective. So we're very critical about that, and a lot of artists are creating work on those issues. So it had dance, performance, music. Well, anyways, you'll see. So I'll just play that, so it gives you a little, yeah. Where's the volume?
Do you know about the 60s scoop? Do you know about the stolen generations? I am one of them. We recorded a conversation with 6 people, all Mi'kmaq except for myself. And we talked about growing up as mixed Indigenous. I edited that conversation and turned it into a media installation and a performance, and invited non-Aboriginal people to play the parts of the dinner guests.
Criteria for the selection of adjudicators. Law degree from a recognized university. Knowledge of and sensitivity to Aboriginal culture and history. Knowledge of and sensitivity to sexual and physical abuse issues.
You know, the first thing they done when we got there was make sure we didn't talk. Not just not talk our own language, but not talk at all. To each other, to ourselves.
Okay. Yeah, it's in the process of being finished. So we invited artists from all over, from Brooklyn, from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I can speak briefly about the piece that I did. Actually, this time will be different with choreographer, OG Creek choreographer. Her name is Lara Kramer, and we were given a carte blanche by Studio 303 to collaborate together. And from the start, our conversations were about the Truth and Reconciliation calls of actions, because it was just when Trudeau promised that he would enact all of the calls of actions. And so we started just sharing about our own personal histories in regards to residential schools and how it affects our personal families. And then, you know, we came to the conclusion, or just the reflection, that it is a big industry, the one of reconciliation. And then we kind of like started putting into context how this government, the Canadian government, actually creates commissions and inquiries on Indigenous people. There is one right now, the inquiry for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. But prior to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was another one called the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People that was actually created right after the Oka crisis in '91. And same process as with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was many years. I think for the Royal Commission was 8 years of research and audiences with different members of the community, and there was a big report that came out with wonderful recommendations. But the problem is that they were left on shelves taking dust. So the whole project became actually a reflection on this, the ongoing and repeated history of the Canadian government to create inquiries and research on Indigenous people, but it's all about beautiful words and not very much actions, as we can see now too. And for the project, so we decided to work with children because it, you know, so actually the book that they were ripping is actually the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Calls of Actions book. So the little girl is ripping all the pages, and then it's like we're playing craft, basically. But for us, it kind of became like kind of a symbol of a graveyard, because so many children disappeared, right? And during the residential schools time, and the last residential school closed in '96. And yes, and so it became like a sound installation performance on this, and a way for us to kind of reflect of what could be a hearing that would be that would actually create maybe a little bit more healing, that the actual hearings that many survivors had to go through to be able to get compensation from the government. And so it was also with their grandmother, the elder that we see painting at the end was their grandmother. So we were 4 generations performing that were all affected by residential schools. How much time do I have? Okay, so for this new edition, I'm very happy because I'm also bringing a Maori choreographer. Her name is Victoria Hunt. She's based in Sydney, Australia, and she will come to lead a masterclass or a workshop at Agora de la Danse. So we'll be meeting every morning with her and training, but also kind of reflecting on this theme of what is representation and self-representation, and we'll be presenting at FTA in their parallel activities on June 2nd. It's open to the public. It's free. It will be a performance or a public sharing. I call it a performative conversation, and it will be our reflections over the 8 days that will be gathered together around this theme of representation, but presenting it through performance, voice, and dance or body movement. And I guess that's it for me. Voilà. Merci.
Thank you so much. It's really amazing to hear about your festival. Who are your audience and how do they respond?
I would say my audience is very mixed, like for that show that I did at MAC. So we had a woman violinist from Brooklyn, and Charles is from New Zealand, and Skina is from BC, Vancouver Island. And I would say it was really like a mix. So we had maybe a third of Indigenous people. And then we had, people from the Concordia, a lot of people from Concordia actually. We had from the dance community, the theater community, the cinema community. It was actually very diverse, which was very, very great. But usually when I present with Oftea, then then the audience is more like the audience of Oftea. Usually, but there's always like Indigenous people coming, and one of my goals in the coming years, upcoming editions, is to really make that more accessible as well to people in Ganawagi, for example, who don't often cross the bridge. So we want to make it more accessible and for the community. So thinking about that. Okay, thank you.